Who wants to sit at the right hand or the left hand of Jesus in his glory? Now, you all answering that, not raising your hands because you know me too well and we're 7 years into this relationship and you don't want to be called out, or you really don't? Yeah, I'm sorry. Those who wanted me to continue in Job, and I will acknowledge it, they're kind of related a little bit today, right? Last week we read wonderfully that Job longs to be able to speak with God, and that God won't contend with him out of his holy fire, the thundering voice and all that. And of course, how does God greet Job and the four friends? Out of the whirlwind. So he does the very thing he says he isn't going to, and then Job, of course, realizes, oh, I don't understand anything, and so that's his answer. But I was drawn to the Gospel of Mark today. Actually, this has been a fun week because all the readings have come up in different conversations, and this would have been a great week if we could go back about 10 years when the National Church was doing those. Ask your question about the readings today to see how it went. They were trying to encourage, I think, a little bit of Bible study among members of the congregation. This would have been a great one because there's a lot of great things. Larry Douglas probably spent 6 months with us on the order of Melchizedek, to give you an idea how long that went in Hebrews Bible study. So there's a lot of great things in our readings. Our Gospel in Mark, just to kind of remind you where we are, because we haven't been doing that for three or four weeks. We're in this section in the Gospel of Mark where Jesus is in the process of 3 times explaining clearly to the disciples and the apostles that he must suffer and die and on the third day be raised. And it begins with that wonderful section where Peter tells him, Lord, don't let this happen to you. And he says, get behind me, Satan. And you're like, well, okay, first time he does it, the apostles and disciples, they aren't the smartest of guys. Most of them are fishermen, commercial fishermen. You've watched the Crabbers on Discovery Channel. They might not be the most intelligent guys on the face of the earth, given how they take care of themselves when they get wounded and things like that. So he teaches them a second time, and they drive off the children indignantly, and Jesus has to bring them and say, guys, pay attention. So he teaches them a third time. Right before this, the 2 immediate verses prior to our reading today, is Jesus again taught them that he must die, suffer and die, and on the third day be raised. And in answer to that question, each time, of course, the apostles and disciples get it wrong. And I want to make it clear, they understand what Jesus is saying. Imagine if Jesus appeared in our midst in October of 2021 and said, I've got to die and be raised from the dead, what you would think about it if it hadn't happened yet. You'd think this dude has lost his mind, particularly those of us that are doctors. We might say, well, if I can get to you with a zapper to get to your heart within 4 minutes, maybe you'll survive, right? If it's after 4 minutes, you're probably going to be brain dead, unless you're in a frozen lake, right? We got too many medical people here. They were correcting it earlier today when we were talking about that. So I understand, we know more things about it. But there comes a certain point where dead is dead, even in our society. And we don't live in a society that is nearly as good at killing people as the Romans were. The Romans excelled at the ability to kill people. And so people knew when you were dead, you were dead. None of this Princess Bride nonsense where you're mostly dead like Wes. You're dead, all dead, right? It's time to rummage through the pockets and take the loose change. If you don't get that reference, you really need to watch a movie sometime, right? So anyway, James and John come up to Jesus and say, Lord, in response to this teaching, their response is, well, Lord, let us sit at your right hand and left hand in glory. It's a great request. We all kind of want it. I hope everybody here acknowledges at least you're sort of tempted to go, I kind of do, right? I kind of want to sit at his right hand and his left hand. Because one of the promises, of course, is that we're going to get a share in his eternal glory. Sitting at one's right hand and one's left hand in the ancient Near East, of course, carried some significance. I know we have a lot of Game of Thrones people, so you understand what it means to be the hand of the king, right? Generally, if you sat at the right hand of the king, you were the military force. It was your job to execute when people disputed with your king. You commanded the armies. People feared you. Probably you commanded the police, the Secret Service. So it was your job to make sure there would be no uprising, no threats, outward threats against your king. Sitting in the left hand was a little bit more, we would call it probably political. You gave good advice. You gave economic advice. You gave all kinds of different advice. And the great thing about sitting at the right hand and sitting at the left hand of the king meant you were the number two in the kingdom. Everybody had to bow to you. Everybody had to suck up to you. You didn't have to worry about treading on people. You just did it. It was a great thing to be sitting at the right hand of power and at the left hand of power. And James and John asked that of Jesus. And of course, Jesus understands that they haven't understood his teaching. They don't understand that when he means he's going to die, he's really going to die. And then after he's dead, he's going to be raised. They just don't understand it. If they did, they wouldn't ask such a stupid question. But Jesus asked them, are you able to drink the cup that I have to drink? And are you able to be baptized with the baptism with which I'm going to be baptized? And they go, oh yeah, totally. And of course, part of the problem that they run into is that their experience of glorification and enthronement is a wonderful experience. What does it mean to be placed in power over your people? It's generally a joyful occasion, right? Parades are held, feasts are held, drunken binges are held. Think back to your favorite stories in history about how when somebody was made a king or a queen, as we got to be a little bit more gender equal, they would throw great big parties for the commoners so people would celebrate. Roman emperors would throw gladiatorial games for months to celebrate this thing. It was like a huge national holiday when kings were made. Jesus' enthronement is a bit different. The cup he has to drink and the baptism with which he's going to be baptized is significantly different than what the world has to teach. We know this, of course, because as Jesus is teaching, and this would be in red letters for those of us who, joke about using red letter Bibles, but it's wonderful in the Greek. I'm having to teach Greek because, poor kid complained that he's the only McVeigh kid that doesn't know Greek. Would you teach it to me? Yeah, poor Casey's up here going, that idiot, right? So I'm having to do a little bit more Greek reading and paying attention, and I'm having to look for verses for him to translate as we're working our way through. And so I'm having to pay attention to these things, and naturally I look at this week's readings to find one that comes from it because I like to teach him what he's reading from. And it's interesting because the Greek for this week, where Jesus is talking specifically about the rulers and about how they're perceived to have authority. The Greek makes it clear it's an illusion. That the authority that rulers of this world have is an illusion. We treat it and we act as if it's real, but it's not. It's the sense of the Greek. And here's Jesus under the thumb of the emperor of Rome saying they don't really have authority. He goes on, of course, to describe how they use their power, and for the most part, we all know Mel Brooks' It's Good to Be the King. You get whatever you want, whenever you want, however you want. Everybody is expected to serve you. And Jesus reminds them that's not how he works. And that's not how God's kingdom works. The other apostles, the other disciples, they're all mad, right? And you can imagine. Can you imagine being one of the other 10 guys in the apostles' crew? And James and John are the two guys that thought, I want to sit at your right hand and left hand. The other 10 aren't really mad at them for asking. They're mad because they didn't think of it. Oh, damn it, why didn't I think of that first? And Jesus has to bring them all in and remind them of this. The rulers of this age don't have real power. It's only perceived. And how they use their power testifies to it, because what do? They lord it over you. They act like tyrants. They expect you to do every whim and beckon. But whoever wants to be the greatest among you has to be a servant. And in fact, he doubles down and says, in fact, whoever wants to be the greatest among you must be a slave to all. Jesus uses the two words, diakonos and doula. And of course, doula has an interesting history as we watch it go through our language, because it used to mean slave. Now we think of a doula as a midwife. It's almost like the church took a word that meant giving birth to something new and decided to use it for a better purpose. But Jesus compares the work of the disciple to a slave. Well, think back to your baptism. What do? We die to ourselves. We die to our wills. We die to the way we want things to go. And what do we promise? We're going to try to do things your way, Lord. And then we have to go on in the liturgy because we recognize we're human beings and we don't trust God the way we're supposed to. And when we fail, when we sin, what do? We repent and try again. In our very liturgy, we have caught the human condition and our relationship with God. We want to do things your way, God. We just don't trust you all the time. And that's where the rubber meets the road on that question that I first asked you. Who wants to sit at his right hand or at his left when he's enthroned? If you've ever felt yourself holding back from God, if you've ever felt, well, we're in that stewardship season, so I better do it, right? When the stewardship people are asking for money, and you say, I'm only going to give them 4% this year, 6%, because I don't like the way the money's being spent. I can't trust those people. Or, even worse, right, if I give them too much money, I won't be able to pay my bills. That was my big argument with my wife back when we were in our 20s, a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. There won't be enough for us. Or when you're asked to give time. You know it clearly. It's on your heart. God's encouraging you to do something. And you just, oh man, Lord, I'm just too busy. I need to sleep in this Sunday because it's rainy and cool and I don't want to get out of bed. Or, I'd rather go to the golf course and experience your glory in a hole-in-one. Or we come up with all kinds of different excuses. Perhaps you felt a call on something that the world would call social justice. That the world needs something, you have an eye for it, you have a passion for it, and you think, oh, I can't do this. No, not me. But you're the one person that has a passion for it. And whenever you talk to people, they're like, oh, maybe you ought to think about doing something about that. No. And the world tries to remind you, you've been appointed by God to be a priest, right? You're bringing God's reconciling grace into some situation in the world, and you fight it tooth and nail. If you remember all those things when I asked you that question, you're right to have not raised your hand. Because it's in those things that we die to ourselves. We give God command of all the very things that we most treasure. And as we've been looking at in Job the last couple weeks, even things like reputation, we give that all to God. And we say, Lord, use me as you see fit. And we promise to do our best to follow him. And yet the human condition is such that I don't quite trust him. I don't know if I can do this. And we turn away. One of the woeful, I guess, or one of the more lamentable things about our faith today is this idea that we have a transformative grace. That you and I, by virtue of our baptism, by virtue of our walk with God, by virtue of the empowering of the Holy Spirit and all that stuff that comes into what you and I call a life of faith, that we're supposed to evidence transformation in our lives. I was reading a comment by somebody in the wider church this week that said, the church is horrible at this. We sometimes talk about it, but we don't ever try to live it. And because we don't try to live it, we keep shrinking. And they're right. How does God continually reach people It's through the wooing. It's through meeting people where they are, particularly in their needs. You all have experienced this, of course, in one level, right? We talk about the food pantry. We had a great visit this week by a couple guys coming in to get food. They thought they had to pay for it for some reason, particularly the meat. And thankfully it was Sarah working, not Veronica, because Veronica would have been, what do I say? And Sarah, of course, lives with a dad that, beats us over her head constantly. You should pray for her, she lives with me. And Sarah said, I just kind of knew, I could tell. Hey, do you guys have money to donate for this? And they're like, what? Do you have money to donate? And don't we have to? Well, not if you don't have funds to do it. Do you let people take it for free? Yeah. Well, how do you get food? God gives it. And of course, the guy stayed there long enough. She was able to share with them. Sometimes it's gift, restaurant suppliers. Sometimes it's restaurants. Sometimes people give thank offerings. Who knows? It just shows up and we get rid of it. And she shared as a clergy kid how, sometimes she has to show up on 20 minutes notice to unload, load because, it's got to be unloaded. And the guys were like, that's the craziest thing I've ever heard. You guys just trust that God's going to make the food appear, that it's going to cover it? And yeah. Sarah apparently was so convincing, she got offered a date. And a guy lamented, the good ones are always taken. But all those who work in that pantry know that experience to one degree or another, right? Think of all the time you've given, the energy. Some of you have given money. Some of you spent time praying for it. And look at what it does. Every month we're taking care of 1,300 to 1,500 people who can't otherwise get food. And doing so in a gracious way that when Sarah doesn't ask for the driver's license and doesn't ask for their address, are you sure you can keep doing it like this? The problem with Jesus' challenge, brothers and sisters, is that it is completely counterism to the world. You and I live in a country that likes to celebrate that capitalism is of God. Hopefully you know better. We live in a country that likes to celebrate that either progressivism or conservatism is a virtue and of God. And hopefully you've learned it's a lot more complicated than that. We live in a world where some people like to say, well, socialism is a better way than capitalism. Got news for them. It's not going to work either. All of it that we create is illusionary. It all sells us short, and more importantly, it sells God short. The great challenge of this passage, and the whole reason I was hoping there'd be somebody who would raise their hand and say, ooh, I'd love to, right? Is the answer to the question, when does Jesus get enthroned? I shared with you a few moments ago about how the enthronement of a king or a queen is a great party. Particularly in the ancient Near East, they would sometimes take months to celebrate the enthronement of a new king. When does Jesus enter his power? You celebrate it on Good Friday. It's when we who think we understand justice, it's when we who think we understand the way God works, it's when we take the nails and drive them through his hands and drive them through his feet, mock him, spit at him, taunt him from below the cross. If you are the Son of God, come down. If you are the Son of God, save yourself. And we put him to death. And who sat at his right hand and his left hand as he entered into glory? The two thieves. Didn't sit. They found themselves on crosses as well. One of whom, even at that last moment, realizes Jesus is dying for nothing that he's done. That the world has conspired to put him to death. And asks Jesus, Lord, remember me when you come into your kingdom. And here's that wonderful promise. I swear to you, this day you'll be with me in paradise. Brothers and sisters, the road to glory is incredibly challenging, but it's not the way that you and I have been taught to work. We don't get glory that really matters through our jobs and our job titles. We don't get it through the money that we accumulate. We don't get it through the reputations that we earn. The lasting glory, the glory that you and I should really be after, the glory that's of the Father, and of which we're promised a full share for all eternity. Actually, we're promised a double share as firstborn, and lasts for eternity, is of those who are servants and slaves to those around them, who recognize that their whole purpose is to be the hands, the feet, the heart, the voice, the shoulder, the whatever is needed to live that transforming grace in the life of another, that person might turn to God and experience that same acceptance and that same hope. Brothers and sisters, being a disciple or an apostle of God is incredibly hard work. And the glorious news is that our Lord knew it before he even entered into that throne. And still, for you, for me, and for countless others, he did it. That one day we all might experience that glory that never fades. That we might share in that inheritance which God has offered us since the beginning. And understand ourselves to be truly loved and truly children of our Father in heaven.